I'd always wondered why there had never been a documentary film made about Frank Frazetta, his life and his work, because both are very fascinating. They're equally fascinating. And it's at one certain point in my career, I would think I was about 27 at the time, I decided, okay, I'm going to be the one who makes the definitive documentary film on Frank Frazetta. It's never been done. I've got to be the one that does it.
Hi gang, Shane Patrick White here with Beyond the Process. You may have noticed a few teaser videos in the last couple of days. That's because the channel is going in a bold new direction. You'll still see the process videos that you've come to know and love, but now I have a new co-host. His name is Lance Laspina. Say hi, Lance.
Hi gang, how you doing?
With interviews from storyboard artists, comic artists, and other creatives in the fields of film, commercials, video games, and comics, we'll be exploring the art of storytelling. But first, I thought it would be important to recalibrate and to get to know us a little bit better. So today, I'm going to interview my friend and colleague, Lance Laspina. So, Lance, tell us a little bit about yourself, starting way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yes. Well, it was a difficult time to stay alive, as we all know.
Land of the Lost.
Land of the Lost. I love that show. First of all, I just want to say it's great to be here. I'm really excited to start this journey with you, Shane. And so I would consider myself an illustrator, a filmmaker. I've always been a creative person. Ever since I was a kid, I was encouraged by my mom to draw. When I was very young, she always made sure I had pencil and paper handy. And she was also a tough critic, which was great because she didn't let me off easily. If I drew something and I was so proud of it, she would encourage me, but then she would always say, but yeah, don't you think like his arm is a little bit long? It's a little bit out of proportion. I was like, oh, damn it. So I go back to the drawing board. Yeah. Cause I always wanted to please her. But in the end, it was that little bit of tough love, I think, that helped me become a good artist. Well, I don't know, a decent artist anyway. Oh, let others be the judge of that. But so yeah, I've always been interested in anything creative storytelling. I wanted to be a comic book artist as a kid because I was really big time in the comic books, and that's kind of what connected us at first. Shane was our initial love for comics. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a comic book artist. And so I kind of followed that passion for a while. My favorite artist at the time was John Buscema. The first comic book that I got into was one that he illustrated called The Silver Surfer, which really made a huge impression on me. And then from there, I discovered Conan, which made a gigantic impression on me.
Hell yeah.
And so I always kind of gravitated toward the non-heroic type of comic books, the non-Superman, that sort of thing, guys who didn't have superpowers that they could rely on. And so that, for whatever reason, I was just really attracted to their struggles, I guess, because they couldn't fall back on a superpower. Like the Punisher, I was really into Batman. I got into Batman, I think, more after The Dark Knight came out. When, Frank Miller redid it with Klaus Janson, and those guys did an amazing job. That had a huge impact on me. So that was when I was younger. And then my dad had actually won a video camera through his work, and he brought it home, and I guess he didn't have any use for it, so he gave it to me to play around with. And that's when I kind of started falling in love with filmmaking. So I started making short films, and then even in school, my teachers would allow me to do a video project in lieu of doing a written essay. And they were extremely encouraging, which, when I think back on it, that's kind of a rare thing, I think, for teachers, especially to adopt that kind of technology so early on. Right. When everything was so stringent, no, you must write, you must write this essay, but they would allow me to do video projects. So I fell in love with film at that point. And so that's when I decided to go to film school. So I applied to, I only applied to a couple schools. It was ridiculous. And USC was the main one that I wanted to get into. All my eggs were in one basket. So anyway, I attended film school, and the first 2 years you don't make any films. It's all film history, film theory, that sort of thing. And so it wasn't till my junior year that we actually started making films. But I had learned prior to that what storyboards were. That was the first time I'd really encountered the word storyboard and learned how important it was in the process of actually making a film, especially in the pre-production phase. And so I thought, well, this is a perfect marriage between my love of drawing comics and filmmaking. And so that's when I really started to get interested in actually doing storyboards for a living. My original intention was to be a director. And I did end up directing eventually, but I've always fallen back on storyboarding because that's really, I guess, my first true love. So
Wasn't there a film or two that inspired you quite I remember you talking about this a long time ago, and it was like there was like one really influential film that pushed you.
Probably I would say 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's that one, and then probably my two favorite films I think of all time. Although it's really hard to narrow it down to two, but I think that two, let's say the most influential, I guess, when I was a kid, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then surprisingly, this is kind of a strange answer because it's usually no one's favorite film, was The Elephant Man. I think it's an absolute masterpiece of filmmaking. And I think I was about 12 years old at the time. And it's obviously it's not a horror film, but because of the nature of what's taking place and how disfigured he was, to me as a young child, it was a type of horror film, I guess, but I also had an extreme amount of empathy for this person. I think I've always had empathy for anyone with a disfigurement. It just goes back to my childhood for whatever reason. I don't know where it started. And my mom, she was always into foreign films and art films and that sort of thing. And so she didn't think anything of it to take me to the theater to see this film.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know
you
if
saw
she
it in
knew.
The theater.
I saw it in the theater.
Wow.
As a child. Yeah. And I think that's why it made such an impression on me on the big screen.
Oh, yeah.
From the very opening scene. And then the black and white nature of it,
right.
It's just, I think it's one of the best films ever made, personally.
Yeah. So in your journey through film school, were you thinking, I'm going to be a feature director? This is where I'm going.
Yeah, that was my intention when I went to school, was to become a feature film director. I didn't really have like a second choice because, again, I didn't know what storyboards were at that point.
Okay.
So, but what happens a lot in film school, and you see this if you attend film school, is that everyone has the intention to be a director. And
Absolutely.
then as they go throughout the process, you're responsible for handling every position. And at some point you find a position that you kind of fall in love with, or you feel like you have
an aptitude for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And it kind of falls into place. And then your ideal vision of becoming a director kind of not goes by the wayside, because it's not like you're failing. It's just, you found something that's even more important to you, that you're better at than
changes.
directing. Yeah.
And for you, I mean, I'm assuming, based on my own research, is that film school is pretty intense.
It is intense, yeah. Especially, like I said, the first 2 years you don't make any films, so it's just the last 2 years that's very intensive. We had to make, I believe it was like a film per week in certain classes, and of course that's not the only class that you're taking. You're taking a multitude of classes plus general education classes as well, like English and math or physics or whatever like that. It was a lot of late nights, of course. Lot of worrying, because it's a creative process. So you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to dream up these ideas, like these stories, to write them, to go film them, to edit them. And then you have to present them, of course, in class.
Right.
Yeah. And that was always kind of, wasn't like the most comfortable thing to do, is you're showing this piece of work in front of all these other students and your professors as well.
By the time you graduated,
yeah.
how many films do you think you ended up working on?
Well, there were my films that I worked on, of course, and then there were my colleagues or my fellow students' films that we because we all helped each other out. And
Right.
part of that was actually part of the course. You had to help each other out, but also I even had friends who were in like a year ahead of me or in a different class, but I would help them regardless, just because we were friends and we all enjoyed the filmmaking process. So
Nice.
to answer your question, it's hard for me to remember exactly how many films I made. I would say about 8 or so, which doesn't sound like a lot,
No, that's a
but
lot.
yeah,
There's
but
so many moving parts there, you know?
yeah, there are. Yeah, there are. Most of them were shorter film. Well, they're all short films. They would be considered short films. But then the last one that we made, that was more of like a little bit longer format, higher quality. We went from 8 millimeter, which we were filming, to 16 millimeter.
Oh, wow.
So
Nice.
yeah, but and no, there was no sync dialogue or anything like that. So everything had to be silent, and so you had to tell the story without dialogue, essentially. And
Right.
in every film that we made, there was no dialogue. So because they really wanted you to be forced to tell the story through the imagery, and if you can't do that, then dialogue's not going to help anyway. So
Right. No, that's a good
yeah,
point.
yeah,
Yeah, that's good practice. So in school, because I remember you saying something like something about this about school just
yeah.
really it was a turning point for you. Like you had
Mm.
a really major incident happen to you.
I started to have arrhythmia, and it actually happened on my trip back to Pennsylvania to visit my parents. I should mention I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I don't think I mentioned that before,
Oh
prior
yeah.
to going to USC in California. So I grew up in a very rural, peaceful area, and then I got dropped into the downtown LA. And I think that probably did have a big effect on my health and the stress level and that sort of thing, because I'd never experienced anything like that before. So I was back visiting my parents. I think it was during Thanksgiving. I was up one night watching television by myself because they were already asleep, and I started to feel my heart just start racing and beat rhythmically, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was going to stop, and it never did. So I had to go and wake up my parents. They called the ambulance. The ambulance came and it took me, and I ended up staying in the hospital for, I think, 3 or 4 days. Had to cancel my flight back to Los Angeles, and they
Jeez.
did a battery of tests and never could really figure out exactly what the cause was. And even to this day, I still don't know exactly. And I still kind of suffer from that every once in a while, although I've kind of gotten it under control to a certain extent. But it's something that I've just learned to live with. And even though
Jeez.
I've had testing since then, and they still, they give me a clean bill of health for the most part. I mean, I have a what's called a right bundle branch blockage, whatever that exactly means. But
Oh, interesting.
so yeah, I got to the point because after I returned to Los Angeles and it continued to happen, and I just thought I can't continue to live like this. I couldn't get my work done, couldn't make my
Right.
films. So I had to beg the president of the film school, Elizabeth Daly, I won't forget her name. I had to beg her to allow me to have a semester off just to rest. And normally they don't allow anyone to do that. If you take off a semester, you'd have to start over again or not.
Oh.
I think you'd actually have to reapply to get back in the film school.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it was a big deal. So her allowing
Whoa.
me to take off a semester was extremely kind gesture on her part. And so yeah, I was always a semester behind then at that point. I think that was my junior year. So I had friends who were ahead of me who had gone to,
Graduating and
yeah, they were graduating ahead of me. And even though I had gone through like the prior 2 years with them. So
yeah.
yeah, it
So
was
I think
interesting.
it's worth pointing out, or I believe it's worth pointing out that you were always a pretty healthy guy. Like
Yeah,
you're always physically fit. Like
yeah,
even now you do CrossFit a
yeah,
couple times a week. So it's
yeah,
like it's not
yeah,
like it
yeah.
was some some health
Um,
issue outside of the
yeah,
not taking
yeah,
care
yeah,
of
yeah.
yourself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Even again, I point back to my mom, who was she was very health conscious. You know, when we were growing up, we had no sugar in the house, like so no sugary cereals or anything like that. It was always oatmeal or cream
Oh
of
my,
wheat.
wow.
No whole milk. I had to grow. I grew up on powdered milk, which was
Oh
horrible
dear Lord.
because I don't think they had skim milk back then, so you had to like do powdered skim milk, and it tasted like chalk
Dirt.
mixed with water. Yeah, it was
That's
terrible.
what it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, and it was like, you know, if you wanted a snack, it was like, okay, you know, grab a piece of fruit or something like that. It was never
Wow.
nothing sugary or anything like that. So yeah, that's what I grew up with. So it kind of, you know, it's kind of stuck with me this entire time. I'm not as bad as that now in terms of like I eat sugar and you know, I kind of eat what I like, but just in moderation at these
Sure.
days, you know, just, I think, I just keep a handle on everything and I still eat it. I mean, if you talk to most people, they'd say, oh yeah, he eats like extremely healthy, but I don't see it that way. I see it like compared to how I used to be as a kid. I think
Oh
I
yeah.
eat fairly normal now.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
seeing you at Take Two
Yeah.
Interactive when we worked together in video games,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your diet was pretty simple. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
basic.
Rice, beans, and tuna. Yeah.
Like, oh
Yeah.
man! And then I got
Yeah.
addicted to tuna and rice, and I just I still eat that today. I'm just like, oh, this works.
Yeah.
Protein, carb, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's supposed to be the perfect mixture of protein and carbs, but who knows?
yeah. So,
Yeah.
so, so because you went through all this, you had the
Mhm.
heart issue. Somewhere along the way, who introduced you to storyboards, like the act of actually telling visual stories?
Well, that's the crazy part. So I had mentioned I learned about storyboards in college, but ironically, there was no storyboard class available for me to take because there are three tracks in at USC. There was the writing track, the production track, which I was in, and then the animation track.
Mm,
And only the animation track actually had a class for storyboarding. If you were in production, you couldn't take the animation storyboarding class, which is ridiculous.
that is
So
ridiculous.
yeah, even though we studied storyboards and what they were all about and how useful they were, it wasn't until after I graduated that I actually started really learning on my own about storyboarding. And I just
Through
remember, I
books
think, yeah,
or
yeah, I think the first book, well, there's Shot by Shot, which is one of the
mm,
most famous books that everyone points to how they learned about storyboarding. And it was the same with my case. The book is meant for directors, and
mhm.
it's useful, obviously, in that aspect, but then it has an entire section on storyboarding. And so anyone who wanted to learn about storyboarding would always read that part of the book. And then after that, I think the biggest impression that I can remember that was made upon me was the Jurassic Park making of book. Back in the day, I don't know if they still do
Wow.
this at all, but they used to make these books on the make after the film would come out. It would be like the making of, and it would have all the concept designs. You know, sometimes it would have like the script. It would show you like different phases of the script, um, all the photographs from the sets and all that. It was like a behind the scenes look. And then in this particular case, they had an entire section of storyboards, and that was really how I learned how to storyboard because you
That's
could kind of
amazing.
compare it to the script. Yeah.
You learned storyboards through the Jurassic Park making of book,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that, you ended up just sort of getting jobs, or like, trying to get that first job out of
Yeah.
school is always tough, especially if you want to get it in the field that you've studied in, which it seems like a lot of graduates do not. I was
True.
lucky; I was able to get a job doing what I was trained to do,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
you moved back from LA to Pennsylvania, right?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. Actually,
Which
I
is
ended up taking my last semester in Pennsylvania because I had already finished my major. I finished my film production major at
mm,
USC, and I just had general education credits left, and so I was able to go to go. I went through Point Park College in order to take classes at Pittsburgh Filmmakers, because Pittsburgh Filmmakers was kind of like a non-accredited school, and you had to go through Point Park College to get the credits. And so I had a great time there my last semester, and I just took courses like improv acting. I took black and white photography. I took it was a storyboarding course with an animation professor, but it wasn't even on the curriculum. He had to invent it for me because I guess they didn't have a storyboarding class either for whatever reason. So it was just he and I, and we worked together very closely. And him being a filmmaker, he always had these scripts that he had written just kind of hanging around, and he would give me one of his scripts and he'd be like, okay, storyboard this. And then I'd go away and storyboard it, bring it back to him. He'd critique it, tell me what I did wrong, and then give me another one and say, okay, try again, that sort of thing. And so he was a big help in helping me learn how to storyboard before I went out into the real world. And I should mention, I also had storyboarded a lot of my films in college. Once I learned what storyboarding was, I was like, oh, this is great. This is good excuse to start drawing again. And because in college, I kind of stopped drawing. I was
going to ask you that. I was like, wait a second. How could he have any time to draw? With all the classes, it would have been
it was terrible. I mean, because I had always drawn as a kid all the way up into my teens, and when I went to college and pretty much just stopped drawing. I mean, I might have sketched here and there, but it wasn't until I started doing my own storyboards again that I started drawing. And so, I lost several years of that. I could have been improving my skill, but that's okay. It was a trade-off for learning filmmaking. And so once I got out of school, I had, like I said, I had those the last semester in Pittsburgh, and I remained in Pittsburgh at the time. I didn't really want to go back to LA. It was so overwhelming to me. I thought, well, Pittsburgh at the time was becoming more of a place where films were being set, like Silence of the Lambs and so on. And I thought, well, I'm just going to stay here, and I'm going to try and get work on a local film whenever they come into town. And so I would apply every film that came into town. I never did get a storyboard job in like working on a film in Pittsburgh, but it led to another project, which was an adaptation of a book. It was a best-selling book called Fields of Fire. It was written by James Webb, or Jim Webb, I think is what he goes by, Jim Webb. It was his experience in the Vietnam War, and they were going to adapt it into a feature film. And so the producer, I think it was the producer who I'd interviewed with in Pittsburgh for another film, he kept me in mind. And then he called me and wanted to gauge my interest in doing this. And of course, I'm like, yeah. when do I start?
Yeah, exactly. Not even what's it pay, just give me.
Yeah, exactly. And that would come back to haunt me to a certain extent, the pay. But no, I got my feet wet. I had to drive down to Virginia on my own dime and meet with Jim Webb.
Wow.
Spend a couple of days with him going over the script. He fed me all these photographs that he had taken during his time in Vietnam. Ooh. And so I had a lot of reference material to fall back on. Read the script, and I can't remember how many pages. It was probably close to 120 pages, and I had to pretty much break down the whole thing. And
I think I remember seeing those boards, actually. I thought they were pretty amazing. I was just like, these are a lot of boards, and so, it was the first time I actually had seen professional boards, And
really?
So,
wow.
Yeah,
okay.
At the time,
I don't know if I guess the only reason they'd be professionals because I got paid something for them. They'd be considered professional.
Well, it's the difference between not seeing boards and then seeing boards. And it's like, well, he did them from a script. He didn't make them up out of his head. So
true. Yeah.
I think that was, I think that it made me realize how much work goes into storyboards versus like doing comics. And I'm like, I might be able to do this job, but it's not for the for the faint of heart either.
No, it's not. No, I think a lot of people don't realize that, at least these days, I work mostly in the commercial realm, And so we don't have a lot of time to turn around the boards. Usually a day or 2 or 3 at the most, depending on how many spots you're working on at a time. And so you don't have a lot of opportunity to sit down, read the script, and really thoroughly think it out and plan it out and by shot. You kind of the time crunch is so bad. You have to pretty much just go on your first instinct and start drawing. And then, submit something so that you could get feedback. You need to have time to do revisions. That's the thing. You can't just turn everything in at the very end of the day and not have time for revisions unless you have an extra day the following day. So it's a very difficult. People think that you're just sketching all day, and it's an easy job. And there's no like mental strain, I guess, because it's just, you've been drawing all your life, that sort of thing. But no, there's actually there's a pressure and a deadline pretty much every time, at least in the commercial industry. I think feature films, it's a little less because you have a much longer period of time to complete a scene than you would, on a commercial, and the budgets are bigger in film.
Hey gang, Shane here. Thanks so much for tuning in to our YouTube channel today. Lance and I are pretty stoked to create these interviews for you, but we could really use your support in getting the word out there. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider subscribing to our channel. Better yet, if you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of the video.
So was it right after that you started working on your portfolio and you submitted it to Take-Two Interactive, or like?
Yeah, I think so. Because that was about, I think that was 95, right? Yeah, 95.
Yeah,
and
because I'd been there about a year, and then you showed up with your hiking boots and
my hiking
earrings.
boots, and my striped shirt. Yeah.
Did they hire you as a storyboard guy or a 3D artist or what?
So originally, like I hadn't done any 3D work, I believe, or like 2D animation or anything like that at that point. I think it was just illustration. But what I think their practice was to find people who were good at drawing and good at art, and then train them to do 3D modeling, compositing, that sort of thing. Yeah, I know. I know.
Who the hell does that? I got hired the same way. I mean, I was a good illustrator, and they were like, well, we can teach you how to do 3D. And they did.
Yeah.
And it was amazing.
Yeah. No, I remember other guys who were hired after me. It was the same story. They had never done any kind of 3D modeling or anything like that, but they ended up being really, really good at it because they had a great artist eye. Yeah. So, and then also, I think they knew my background in film, having gone to film school and so forth. And because they were producing these games, these like live action,
full motion video games.
Full motion video games, where essentially they would film Hollywood actors on a green screen, and they would be in the game, and the backgrounds would all be replaced by 3D models and environments, that sort of thing. But they were able to get some major stars, Christopher Walken.
Terry Garr.
Terry Garr, that's right. Yeah.
Burgess Meredith.
Paul Giamatti. Yeah.
Because they had invested like $150,000 in a compositing system. It was called Flint at the time. And there were 3 of us there was a few of us wanting to learn it. You eventually became the compositor guy, right?
Yeah. I think because of my background in film, they thought that I would be a decent compositor. So they had me trained in green screen compositing on the Flint system. And I spent like half my time doing compositing and then the other half doing 3D modeling. And I also did some storyboards there and end up getting to direct the intro to Black Dahlia, which was fun. That was a live action intro.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, that was the first time I actually got to be on set, and I storyboarded some of the sequences and got to act a little bit in some of that too.
That's right. Yeah, you were the killer. Yeah.
fließt aus der Sehnsucht süßer Strahl.
I think that was interesting because when you're working in an environment like that, there are a lot of people who are growing at the same in the same direction. You know, you're all trying to get this game finished,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
everyone gets to try things. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and nowadays it's a lot more specialized.
True.
So
True.
it's cool that
Yeah.
you were able to both, you know, come in just as a capable, willing artist and get trained, and then find your
Yeah.
vocation.
True.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
you didn't stay around long, did you?
No, I stayed about a year, and then I kind of realized that if I really want to move my career forward, I'd have to get back to California at some point.
Was that a hard
So
decision?
it was, yeah, it was because again, at that point, I was not the biggest fan of California. It was just I just had a lot of bad memories with the stress
Mm-hmm.
and the crowdedness. I guess it just was kind of overwhelming every time I thought of California. Kind of overwhelmed me. And so I thought like placing myself back into that environment, it might stir up some bad things with my health
Right.
again.
Right.
So yeah, I was reluctant. But I knew that I, I wasn't going to get much further living in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, it's not like today where you can kind of live anywhere you want.
Right.
Back then you had to be where they were making the films. And so that's when I packed up and moved to California with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. So
Oh, okay.
so that helped as well. I mean, having that support definitely helped
Yeah,
out.
that's a good point. So when you did move out there, how did that go? Like, did
It actually went way better than I thought. I was able to land work pretty quickly. So Laurie, who's my wife, the
Mhm.
girlfriend at the time, we both went out. I think it was in February of 1997, and she was going out because she was transferring her work, same company, but from
Hmm.
Pennsylvania to California.
Nice.
So, and I went out with her, and I figured I might as well try and get some interviews drummed up. So ahead of time, I had gone and sent out resumes, and this is like when PDFs were barely a thing. Like people didn't really know what PDFs were. So I was emailing PDFs to people, and they couldn't open them, and I'm like, oh my god. So, and so I ended up having to make like a reel of like some of the work that I had done when I was at Take Two, and then I had my art portfolio as well, and
Mhm.
I would send those out, and I got several interviews and ended up working almost immediately. Started working on a couple of feature films doing Elastic Reality as the software program, which is essentially like morphing. And so you would take a
Yeah.
2D image and you'd morph it.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I also simultaneously, I got a job doing storyboards on some 3D IMAX films. So one was
Yeah.
like T-Rex Back to the Cretaceous, I think was what it was called. And it was a lot of
Nice.
fun because it's a dinosaur film. But so
Yeah, man.
I would work like all day on doing visual effects and morphing. And then I would come home and I would draw storyboards the rest of the evening. Back then I could do that kind of stuff. These days I could never do it.
Talk about kickstarting your career. That's amazing.
Yeah. Each of those jobs led to another job and then another job and another
Nice.
job. So yeah, once I got those kickstarted, then it was just like I was kind of on a roll at that point.
So yeah, it was about, I think it was 99, 2000 maybe,
Mm-hmm.
that I got that Icon book from the Fenners. Who they published a bunch of hardcover books, and I got this gorgeous book. And I know you were or have always been a fan of Frank Frazetta
Yeah.
since you were a kid, right?
Yeah. He was like the biggest influence on me. When I was a 16-year-old boy, my parents actually drove me out to East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, to go to the Frazetta Museum. And when I was there, it was the first time I'd ever seen a Frank Frazetta painting in real life, and it just absolutely blew me away. It's so much better than the reproductions in the books. And so we were talking to Ellie, who was there. That was Frank's wife at the time, and Ellie was telling us that, I think they were getting ready to close. And she said, well, if you stick around a little bit, Frank's coming to pick me up. You'll get a chance to meet with him. So, of course, I thought, oh my God, we are not leaving this place until I get to meet Frank Frazetta. And shortly thereafter, he came in and, was very, very like reserved, I guess, more shy.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know what I was expecting because, I'd never
You
seen
were
an
expecting
interview with
Conan,
him.
is what you were
I was
expecting.
expecting Conan. Yeah. I mean, this guy who paints that kind of imagery,
Yeah.
you think that he's going to come bursting in, and like yell or something like that. But no, it wasn't like that. He was very, like I said, kind of just reserved and, humble, I guess. And
Yeah.
I was trying not to be too fanboyish, meeting him, but eventually, I had to pull out some of my artwork, and it was terrible. I mean, I would never ever, if I could go back and erase that. And he was very kind. Like he wasn't like mean about it or anything. He was just trying to be very encouraging. But now when I think about that, God, how embarrassing. So that was my first opportunity to actually meet Frank, and it made a big impression on me. And so fast forward another 15 years or so, and I'd always wondered why there had never been a documentary film made about Frank Frazetta, his life and his work, because both are very fascinating. They're equally fascinating. And there just never been any like interviews or anything like that I could even come across. I mean, maybe once or twice in a comic magazine, they would have a short interview with him, but you don't get to hear his voice. You don't get to see him talking. Right. So he was always like this mystery figure to me until I got to meet him in person. And so it's at one certain point in my career, I think I was about 27 at the time. I decided, okay, I'm going to be the one who makes the definitive documentary film on Frank Frazetta. It's never been done. I've got to be the one that does it.
I think I remember him having a stroke or something, and I got this book.
Yeah.
And then I got on the phone with you. I'm like, I said something. I think I might have put the urgency in your ear of like, he's not going to be around forever. Dear God. Because I remember you talking about wanting to do a film. I'm like, this is a go, no go situation. We got to do something.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, his health was very tenuous at that time. And he's such a strong figure. He ended up, living way longer than I think any of us expected him to.
Yeah.
After what he'd been through, and even his kids will tell you. I mean, there were several times that they thought he was on his deathbed, and they were reading him his last rites and all that. Ooh. And then he came back. Because he had a major thyroid issue that was undiagnosed for 8 years. And he almost died from that. And then, of course, the strokes, and probably I'm guessing the thyroid condition is what led to the strokes, but I'm not a doctor, so I can't say for certain. But yeah, you were right. I mean, we had to like move at that point and get something filmed. Also, his because of the strokes, his speech had been affected. And so we thought like, well, we don't, we have to do it now before it would happen to get any worse.
When I was 50, 54 something, my thyroid went. I didn't know what it was. I started getting sickening, coughing.
Yeah, so I gathered a bunch of my closest creative friends, like you, of course, were one of them. And then we formed the company Cinemachine and set out to produce like a sort of a trailer, I guess you'd call it, or
a little
like a
little
sample teaser, yeah. That we could use to show to the Frazettas that we could do this. And so we all met up at the I think it was the 1999 San Diego Comic-Con. And
that's right.
Yeah, and shot a bunch of interviews. I edited it together with music, and I sent them a copy and then just waited. And eventually I got a phone call, and it was Frank Jr. who was on the phone. And I answered the phone, and he said, Lance, he's like, we just finished watching the little film you put together. And I said, what'd you think? He says, well, we were all crying. He's like, it really touched us. I thought, oh my gosh, I guess that I wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing, but in the end, it ended up being a good thing. And then he passed the phone over to Ellie. and Ellie went on about it, and she told me that other people have tried to do this in the past. They had sent her similar videotapes, and none of them have been this quality. And so she was impressed. And then she handed the phone over to Frank, the man, and Frank got on the phone, and he was thanking me. And I thought, God, I'm the one who should be thanking you for everything you've done for me. Yeah. So it kind of blossomed from there. And then I think you're right. I think at one point she may have wanted to charge us a fee to do it, but then I was able to express that, look, we're all independent filmmakers. We have no money. We're doing this out of love for it. I was, prepared to finance the entire film myself, even though I didn't have the money to do so. Right. I was going to go into debt to do this.
And so we were kind of off and running at that point. It was just kind of like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. I think we attended the next like 2 or 3 San Diego Comic-Cons. And then also, of course, in 2000 is when we shot the majority of Frank's footage back in East Stroudsburg at his home and on his estate. And it was like a 2-week shoot that we did. So, yeah. And it's still to this day probably one of the best experiences of my life, getting to spend that time with Frank and hang out with him and get to know him, not just as the artist, but as a person, and what makes him tick. And I always had this special affinity for Frank because he wasn't just an artist. He was a sportsman. He loved sports. And in fact, he was offered a contract by the, I think they were called the New York Giants at the time. This is the baseball team, not the current football team. And that was before they moved to San Francisco, and he turned it down. So he could have played professional baseball at some point, but I always admired like his athleticism because we talked about this, how I was always into sports and athletics. And then I also had this artistic side, and those two things usually aren't congruous. They usually don't show in the same person.
That's true.
But usually it's like one or the other. It's like usually you're artistic or you're athletic and like a jock,
right?
But it's usually not both. So I knew that I could connect to Frank on that level. And we did, because I could talk sports with him, and he loved that because he actually likes to talk sports more than he likes to talk art. So that was my way of building trust. And so that he would allow us, to open up his house and himself to us whenever we were filming the documentary. Because we always had the cameras going, and he would, he got sick of it at a certain point. He would be like, no, stop filming, try and push us away. Right. So you had to find that fine balance of like when we're going a little bit too far, and then you had to pull back a little bit and give them some breathing space. But while you're there, it's like you want to take advantage of every second that you have, because it's finite. You only have 2 weeks. That's it. You want to capture as much stuff as you possibly can. So absolutely. I was always like, just run the camera, even if he doesn't know it's on.
Yeah. So this is like a big departure from just doing storyboards. Like this wasn't just it was creative in and of itself, from a technical side. Like I think in the post-production, that was where you really got to flex, and show your creativity.
Sure.
I mean, but going from storyboarding to doing a documentary is entirely different than going from storyboarding to doing a feature, a made up feature. So there's a lot of rules and things that come along with that. Did you just learn on the job, or?
I watched a lot of feature documentaries and even short documentaries that I admired. And I tried to see how did they make this documentary more cinematic, more like a feature film, like a feature narrative film, that sort of thing. So I knew that I didn't want to have a narrator. That was one of the first things that I thought of. I thought, I don't want to have to rely on narration to tell the story. I want to tell the story through people's interviews and through the shots that we choose and that sort of thing. And I wanted to make it kind of cinematic with the lighting and the camera movement and, a little bit of effects here and there, that sort of thing. And the music, of course, music played a huge role in making it much more professional sounding and looking. Yeah, that was my goal, was to kind of, I didn't want to make it like a mundane documentary. I wanted it to be very cinematic, and the nature of Frank's artwork. You know, I wanted to have some kind of impact. And so, yeah, that was always my goal. I don't know if I really succeeded in that aspect. I mean, when I rewatch it, you know, obviously it's like anything, you're always going to want to change something or go back and redo something, but it's too late at this point. So.
Well, yeah. But I mean, you are kind of going back and doing stuff to it, right? I mean, it's been, what, 20
it's been
years?
20 years. Yeah, it's been 20 years now. Yeah, it's hard to believe. So it's the 20th anniversary. So I'm currently upscaling the film from standard definition to 4K. It looks so much better. And I also went back and redid the audio and a lot of the sections where, like, there was background noise. Like a couple of times we were interviewing Frank Jr. outside, and you could hear traffic and wind, that sort of thing. So that's all been eliminated. And then there's these interviews of Frank that were done in like 1984 at a local college, and they're like on these old VHS tapes, and they had this really like this loud hiss, you know, going through. And when I originally released the film back in 2003, I did as best I could to try and eliminate the sound. But now these days with AI technology, I could pretty much completely eliminate it. So it's just, you just hear Frank's voice. It's very clear.
I did it all. And it's just that there didn't seem to be a market back in the 40s and 50s for artists who painted. Unless you painted Westerns or detective novels, that seemed to be the only game in town. And I loved fantasy and that sort of thing. There was no way to do it except in comics.
Yeah, in that aspect, I've been able to go back and redo some things. But I guess what I'm talking about is actually like reshooting things, you know, in a different style.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, touching it up and sort of up-resing it for newer audiences.
A new audience, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, my plan is to have it released next month in December. So,
oh man, fantastic.
Yeah.
so from there you went, you shot the documentary feature. It threw you for a loop. You were financially paying that off for a little bit, but did you just go right back into storyboarding or do more filmmaking or what?
At that time, I was heavily into doing visual effects on films, like feature films. So I was trying to edit and also support myself because I needed to make money. I needed to like not only just fund the film, but I needed money to live on. Even, and unfortunately, I had my wife who was also working at the time. I couldn't have done it without her support. But so I was taking on these feature film jobs, working 9 to 10 hours a day, coming home and trying to edit the film. And that's why it took forever for the film to get made eventually, because I just didn't have the time to dedicate to sitting down and doing it, because I had to continue to work. Right. And I like I said, I went into debt. It took me, I don't know exactly how many years, probably 3 or 4 years to pay my way out of that debt. And it was all from, again, going back to work and working on these feature films. So even after the film was released, I was still in debt. And then I really had to go back to work hard, like full time, and just keep chipping away at this credit card debt. So, and then eventually, of course, the film made some money, so that helped too. But
but it didn't pay for itself, as it were. But it's I mean, would you consider it a cult classic at this point?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's looked upon fondly by a lot of Frazetta fans. Mean, it's the one opportunity people have to see Frank talking and to hear, learn about his childhood. And we went back to Brooklyn to visit his mom, who was still living at the time. And, there's a lot of like, not just artwork type information and like how he created his famous masterpieces, but there's a lot of like Frank as the person as well. And I think that people connected to him more deeply that way is because they're already connected through his artwork, and so now they can connect to him as a person, which always then makes the artwork more profound, right? Like when you learn more about the person behind the artwork, then it takes on a new gravitas, a new importance. So
Yeah. It's interesting because, that old adage, you should never meet your heroes. But in this case, was this worth it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was a dream come true for me to
That's awesome.
have to be able to spend that kind of time with someone who I looked up to for so long. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a real joy.
It's kind of strange because it's like when you do something like this, I would have to wonder, because I've never had this experience. I mean, I got to share it with you a little bit.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I feel like, do you feel like when this happens to some people, it becomes like the centerpiece of their life? That's the apex. Or
Yeah.
and sometimes they try to recreate that, or they try to strive for more.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you needed to strive for more, or to top it, or to do something bigger and better? Or were you just like, I'm satisfied. I just want to go back to living my life.
No, to be completely honest, and it's kind of painful to say this, I thought it was going to be the launching pad for my career. I thought I was going to be able to go from this to, I thought someone was going to be like waiting to hire me to do the next, documentary on so-and-so. And I did get like some interest in people would say like, oh, you should do this. You should do this documentary on so-and-so, and he deserves. I'm like, okay, who's going to pay for it? Like, are you going to pay for it? Like,
I remember hearing about that, and I'm like, they just want a free ride. I'm like, hell with that. As cool as that guy is, nope.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, eventually I did go back to doing storyboards. And obviously it's a very important time in my life. And it's something I look back on fondly, and I'm proud of that I actually did it, because there's so many times prior that I had thought I was going to do something, I should do this, I'm going to do this. And then, you just wait and wait and wait. And then eventually you never end up doing it. So I was so determined at that point that I was going to make this happen, that I wasn't going to let anything stop me. And that's why I didn't want to wait for funding. I didn't want to wait to have to raise money. And again, as we talked about, it was kind of a tenuous situation with Frank, and we didn't know how long he was going to be around. And I wanted to get the interviews shot with him prior to anything bad happening. And then to that same point, I also wanted to get the film editing done. I wanted to get the film made. It was painful for me to be taking so long to get the film finished, because I kept thinking like, God, if something happens to Frank before the film is done, he'll never get to see it. Never get that enjoyment out of watching it. So fortunately, I didn't have to worry about that. He was able to watch it, and he loved the film.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that was another, giant piece of satisfaction for me, is to hear his comments and how proud of the film he was himself. Yeah.
So in terms of shaping your career, after that, you continue to work in storyboards, in commercials, and some film stuff. And that's basically been your career this entire time, or has it bounced around a little bit? Or I mean, good question. I think it has primarily been, it's definitely, I would say 90% storyboards. I never did end up going back to the visual effects realm. Once I stopped doing that, it was like, okay, because I always enjoyed drawing more than I did doing visual effects anyway. And I could do storyboards remotely. So I was doing storyboards, from my house way before the pandemic. So that when the pandemic hit, it didn't change that much for me in terms of my job. The majority is storyboard work, but I also did work at a video game company doing some art direction, like freelance art direction. I worked at a comic book company doing art directing their comic books. I did a cover for a Marvel comic book. I should have had all these things written out, because whenever you asked me, my mind went blank. That's okay.
Like I don't remember what I did in the last 20 years. You do kind of bounce around so much. Honestly, when I'm working on storyboards and someone, asks me, what are you working on these days? Like what project you're working on? I go blank. Like I work on, so many projects back to back that as soon as I'm done with one, it is out of my memory and I'm on to the next thing. And so I can't recall even what I did like the last week. If someone said, what are your last 3 projects you worked on? I have to sit down and really think about it, because it's just like a job now. And I'm not, it's not like making that huge of an impression on me. I guess it's not like a big project, because these are 1 to 3 days. So I'm not on something for like a year where I'd obviously remember what it is.
So as we close out here, what do you see as far as your career goes? Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Like what do you see yourself? Do you think you'll retire?
No, and I don't think I'll ever retire.
So
but I
you
also
always do work to make money.
Yeah, I always do something creative. Yeah.
Okay.
To make money, hopefully. Yeah. Definitely something creative. And if I can make money at it, that's a big bonus for sure. But I think, and we'll have this discussion later with the advent of AI technology, but the future doesn't look bright for any of us, especially storyboard artists. So I am trying to get ahead of the curve in that aspect. I'm trying not to, push against the tidal wave that's inevitable. I think a lot of people are just, they're complaining and complaining, not doing anything about it. So I'm just trying to again, because I think I've missed the opportunity in the past on technological advances, even though I did say I was one of the ones to adopt going digital. So I don't think I missed out on that aspect, but there are other things I think I might have been a late adopter of, and I don't want to make the same mistake in this aspect. So I'm just trying to figure things out. It's a difficult time, I think, for all of us. But fortunately, you and I were old enough to have like real world experience, whereas I feel badly for the young people out there who are just coming out of school, who have always had the dream of either, not just storyboards, but any kind of art in general. Because I think the entire art field is being threatened by AI. So I don't know what to say to someone. Like if someone asked me for advice on what to do now, I honestly, I think I would just say, try and keep up with the technology as much as you can, because I do think that people who have a creative sense are going to do the best in the AI world. I don't think it's just like people who can prompt, because eventually we're going to get past prompting. Like that's not going to be a thing. It's going to be much easier than prompting. So right now prompting is a skill, but it's going to become, much less of a thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but I think that people, if you want to call it like an AI curator, I guess that's the best title I could come up with. Someone who is in charge of the AI, who has really good taste, who has a great eye, artistic eye, and hopefully who could still use their artistic skill in some manner. I don't know how that's going to be implemented though. Yeah. That's the problem. So it's still at the rate that everything is progressing, it's still kind of too early to try and have a definitive vision of what the future looks like. For me anyway. So I don't know how you feel about this, but I mean, we could leave this as a discussion for another time.
We'll definitely get into it in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. Okay, well, I guess that's it. I really appreciate you sharing your life story, Lance, and I'm glad to have you on board. This will be a lot of fun moving forward. So
I'm looking forward to it, Shane. Really looking forward to it.
It's gonna be huge. I feel
People watch. You keep watching. We have some fun stuff planned for you.
Definitely. Until next time, I'm Shane Patrick White.
And I am Lance Laspina.
And this is Beyond the Process. So, as always, thanks for watching.